There are moments in life that mark us forever, whispers of destiny that change our path when we least expect it. The story I'm going to tell you today could be that of your neighbor, your grandmother, or even your own. Are you ready to hear this story? I never expected my husband's funeral to be the beginning of an even greater nightmare. As the first shovels of dirt fell onto his casket, my phone vibrated in my purse. An unknown number. The message I read froze my blood. I'm alive. I'm not in the coffin. Don't trust our children. My name is Dorothy Miller. I'm 66 years old, and what I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. The day we buried Walter was the quietest I can remember, as if even the air in our small town of Oak Ridge had decided to mourn with us. I stood by the freshly dug grave, with my sons Scott and Benjamin beside me, both wearing black suits that seemed foreign on them. Their faces showed the appropriate sadness, but their tears seemed calculated, and their embraces conveyed coldness. I clutched the bench to keep from falling when I felt my phone vibrate. My knees buckled as I read that message. "Who is this?" I replied with trembling fingers. The response came immediately. "Can't say. They're watching me. Don't trust our children." I looked up at Scott and Benjamin. They stood half a step away, seemingly composed, like people already thinking about their next affairs. Something wasn't right. Nothing was right. The funeral was attended by shamefully few people. Pastor Richards, myself, my friend Marge, Vanessa, Scott's wife, and my sons. For a man who had lived 70 years in the same place, who fixed bicycles for everyone, who always lent his tools and helped however he could, the emptiness was strange. "We didn't want to bother anyone," Scott said, when I whispered something about the neighbors from the workshop. "Dad wasn't one for noise. Let's keep everything simple." But Walter loved people. He enjoyed chatting on the porch, laughing, reminiscing about his fishing days. He would have wanted to say goodbye to all of them. While I tried to listen to Pastor Richards, our life together paraded before my eyes. We met when I was 24, in this small town, with dusty streets. I was caring for my mother and cleaning houses to earn a living. Walter worked in the workshop he had inherited from his father, fixing bicycles and occasionally rototillers, always with grease-stained hands and a shy smile. I remember the first time he spoke to me. It was Tuesday. I was going to the market in a faded green dress and worn shoes. He stepped out to the door of his workshop, wiped his hands on a rag, and smiled as if apologizing. "Good morning, Dorothy. Can I check your bicycle?" I didn't have a bicycle, of course, but I made up a silly excuse just to talk to him. And so it began. Chats under the old oak tree, the bench by the community center, a promise for life, and a modest wedding, where instead of an orchestra, we had a record player, and instead of a restaurant, pies made by the neighbors. The first years were difficult but bright. A small house, 2 rooms and a tin roof. Buckets in the corners for when it rained. We laughed when it started dripping at night, and we'd run around moving pots from place to place. Walter worked from dawn till dusk. I sewed dresses and skirts for the women in town, mended coats, did knitting. When Scott was born, my heart nearly burst with happiness. His father's big eyes, my smile. 2 years later, Benjamin arrived, just as beautiful. Walter would take them fishing at the creek on Sundays, teach them to hold tools, read them stories at night. I fed them, dressed them, stroked their little heads, listened to their breathing at night, and it seemed that happiness was something as simple as bread, as warm as a fire. But what if that happiness was just an illusion, and if those you love most were planning something terrible? The thought never crossed my mind then. But now I know that betrayal can come from where you least expect it. Then they grew up. Scott always had character, was decisive, serious, ambitious. He started asking early on why we lived modestly, why we didn't have a car like other people. Benjamin followed his brother like a shadow. When Scott turned 18, Walter offered him a place in the workshop. He pushed away the toolbox as if it were something alien and pressed his lips together. "I don't want to get my hands dirty, Dad. I'm going to be someone important. Walter didn't say anything, but I saw him sit on the porch afterward looking at the stars for a long time, with a tired sadness. He hadn't just lost a helper, but an entire language he had dreamed of speaking with his son. Years passed, and Scott really did move to the city. Got a job at a real estate agency in the county seat. Rose quickly. Benjamin followed him without much thought. Their money couldn't be compared to our income from the workshop. And my side jobs. At first I was proud. The boys had made progress. Good for them. But then the joy gradually became thinner. Like paper. Fewer calls. Rarer visits. They arrived in shiny cars with elegant suits. Speaking strange words. Deal. Investments. Property. They looked at Walter and me, as one looks at old objects, perhaps dear but embarrassing to have in view. "Mom," Scott said one day, "you and Dad should move somewhere more decent. The house is falling apart." He was right. The roof leaked more often. The stove was becoming temperamental. But these walls whispered our entire life. The children's first steps, night conversations, thousands of simple dinners. To anyone else, it was a miserable house. To us it was our home. Walter, as always, said it quietly and precisely. "Dorothy, our boys' money has changed them. We no longer fit into their lives." I argued with myself. I justified them. They're busy, they don't have time, they're young. I waited. They'll get organized, they'll settle down. But deep inside, I already understood that we were losing them. I just didn't know yet to what extent. What I didn't know then was that this feeling of loss would soon turn into something much darker, a threat I couldn't even imagine. And it would all start with that message by Walter's grave. When Scott brought Vanessa to introduce her to us, everything became clearer. She got out of the car in heels that immediately sank into the ground in front of our porch, wearing a bright red dress that looked straight out of a magazine. "A picture. Pleased to meet you," she said, smiling politely and offering the tips of her fingers. Her gaze scanned the house quickly, like a scanner, and suddenly I felt ashamed of our rugs, our curtains, of all our simplicity. At the table she barely ate, poked at the meatloaf, stirred the mashed potatoes, took a sip of iced tea. Scott beside her seemed tense as a string, and apologized for everything. For things he had never apologized for before. "Next time we'll go to a restaurant," he whispered as if I couldn't hear him. I heard every word, and each one hurt. Benjamin remained single, but he adopted the same urban skin. He came for the holidays, always in a hurry, always with an important call. He would answer at the table, nod into the phone, and get up. "Mom, I've got to run. I have an early meeting tomorrow." Our family Sundays scattered like ripples on water, and dissolved. Christmas became a formality. Expensive, unnecessary gifts. Conversations like reports. They would sit for 2 or 3 hours and leave with relief, as if they had fulfilled an obligation. Walter and I grew old together. He stubbornly continued going to the workshop, no longer with the same hands, but with the same love for his craft. I continued sewing out of habit, though my eyes weren't the same. We clung to our modesty, didn't ask the boys for a penny, and on dark nights on the porch he would say, "You know, Dorothy, the problem isn't that they have money. The problem is that with the money they seem to think we're no longer important." As always, he was right. It wasn't about dollars, it was about the heart. Then the practical conversations began. Vanessa, on one of her rare visits, said in a flat voice, "You should sell the house and move into a nice retirement home. There are doctors and care there." Retirement home hit me like a slap. For 40 years we had built this nest, raised our children, saved so they could have better shoes, newer books, and now a nursing home. "We don't need a retirement home," Walter replied calmly, with that direct dignity he always had. "We're fine here." But I saw my children's faces. They agreed with her. We had become an inconvenience, an issue they wanted to resolve. By Walter's grave, Pastor Richards finally fell silent, and on the lid of the too simple casket, the first clods of earth sounded. The sound was dull, final, and I could barely stay on my feet. Marge offered me her shoulder, The phone in my purse vibrated again, as if alive. I pressed the screen against my palm like something burning. "We'll pressure you. Take care of yourself," I read and put the phone away. "Mom, is everything okay?" Scott was by my side too quickly, too timely. I looked at his face as if for the first time. Everything was in place, but there wasn't a single living feature. "Everything's fine," I said, and closed my purse. "I need to go home." All the way home, I repeated those 4 words to myself. Don't trust our children. Maybe someone decided to play a cruel joke on me. But then why did each of their hugs seem colder to me than the air above the fresh earth? Why did they rush the funeral? They chose the simplest option, as if they were in a hurry to put a period on it. That night, alone in the kitchen, where it still smelled of wheat bread and strawberry jam, I laid out our life before me, like in the palm of my hand, from the faded dress at the town square, to these 2 quiet funerals. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think aloud. What if it's not just coldness? What if there's something worse? Then I still didn't know how far it had all gone. Then I was just learning to hear the truth in my own heart. But the truth was already being whispered to me by someone from the darkness. "Take care, Dorothy. Don't trust." What I couldn't imagine was that my journey toward this terrible truth was just beginning, and that I would discover things about my own children that would forever change the way I saw the world. Sometimes love is not enough to protect us from those we love most. From that day by the cemetery fence, I could no longer look at my children with the same eyes. Every "How are you, Mom?" sounded fake. Every gesture seemed forced. They didn't come with affection. They came with initiatives. Either a real estate agent who, without warning, walks through the house, takes photos, measures the rooms with steps, or some appraiser who checks the attic and basement, writes something in his notebook, and leaves just as quickly. In the kitchen, during tea, Scott spread the papers like a fan. Neat, beautiful, like a person accustomed to negotiating. "Dad, Mom," uniform smile, soft voice. "I've calculated. Your house, at most, is worth 100,000. If we sell now, at the peak of the market, I'll add something more, and you'll move to a better place, with amenities. Doctor nearby. Decent neighbors. $100,000 for the walls into which our entire life had been absorbed." I silently cleared the plates from the table. My hands were shaking so much that the spoons clinked against each other. Walter sat upright, as always, and listened attentively, without interrupting. "And also," continued Benjamin, looking at the paper to avoid meeting my eyes, "Dad should leave the workshop now. It's dangerous. Age. It's time to rest. Working is not a punishment," Walter said so calmly that the room grew quieter. "It's a purpose." Purpose? They didn't hear. They only heard figures. "What will be better for everyone?" they repeated like a spell. "Early inheritance," that's what Scott called it, smiling. Early inheritance, parents still alive, and they were already mentally dividing. We endured several more such visits. Vanessa, on one of those days, brought brochures of retirement homes. Glossy, with smiling grandparents on the cover, and placed them next to my sewing patterns. "There's food and activities there," she said in her polite voice. "You'll be more at ease." "We're at ease at home," I replied. "This is where we live." When they left, Walter fidgeted with the edge of the tablecloth for a long time, then raised his eyes. "This isn't about care, Dorothy. They're in a hurry." "Why?" I didn't know, but the anxiety had lodged in my throat like a bone, and there was no water to relieve it. The last conversation with Scott, which I still hear at night, happened 3 weeks before. Yes, he came alone, without Vanessa, sat at our old table where he once ate oatmeal as a boy, and said without looking at me directly, "Mom, whatever happens, Benjamin and I won't leave you, we'll always be with you." Then it sounded like consolation, but by the grave like a warning. Whatever happens, as if he already knew in advance. On Tuesday, everything abruptly broke. Walter went to the workshop early, as always. "While it's cool, I'll work on the frames." He waved from the gate, and I returned to the kitchen. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, his favorite. The phone rang so suddenly that my heart skipped a beat. County Hospital? I asked mechanically, though it was they who were calling. County Hospital, confirmed a female voice. Are you Dorothy Miller? Your husband has been admitted in serious condition. Come immediately. The world melted as if from heat. I grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling to the floor. Words wouldn't form. What? How? Alive? Breathing. But on the phone they repeated the same thing. Come. Marge drove me. I was trembling so much I couldn't hold the keys. The road to the city turned into a buzz. Windows, trees, stops. Everything was like in a bad dream. At the emergency entrance, I met my sons. Somehow I immediately noticed. Too quick, too timely. Who called them? Me? No. Mom, Scott hugged me tightly. In the workshop, they say something exploded. Burns' head. He's in intensive care. Benjamin stood nearby, eyes red, but his gaze wandered, as if he was waiting for something, not fearing. The nurse at reception explained routinely. Close relatives one by one, no more than 5 minutes. Keep your composure. I ran my hand along the cold wall to avoid falling, and followed her down the hallway, which smelled of medications and metallic cleanliness. Behind the frosted glass, lights flickered, machines beeped. My heart was beating so loudly that I heard it in my ears. I stopped at the door that said intensive care, grabbed the handle and took a deep breath, as if before plunging into icy water. In the ICU, it was bright and cold, like in a workshop where everything is metallic and impartial. Walter lay under machines with bandages, his face half covered with gauze. Only one hand free. I touched his fingers, warm, recognizable. Walter, I'm here, I said softly, so as not to spill my voice. Hold on. Do you hear? Everything will be fine. It seemed to me that his fingers responded almost imperceptibly. His eyes under the lids trembled, as if he wanted to say something. I called the nurse. She looked at the monitors, nodded compassionately. That happens. Don't expect too much. Spasms. But I knew his hand. He was trying to reach me. For 3 days I practically lived in the corridor, on a hard chair, nodding off, waking up to the beeping of machines. My sons took turns according to a schedule, but spent more time near the doctor's office, cornering doctors, whispering at reception. Once, as I passed by, I heard a fragment. Life insurance, $500,000. For accident up to $750,000. Who is your beneficiary? The word beneficiary stuck in my head like a cold nail. In the evening, Scott sat next to me and, in a too uniform manner, said, Mom, we've checked the documents. Dad has a policy for $500,000, and also through the employee compensation line. If it's a workplace accident, you can get up to 7. We need to complete all the formalities so you can be at ease. I don't need money, I said, and my eyelid twitched. I need my husband alive. Of course, Benjamin nodded, but in his eyes the calculator clicked like an abacus. We'll take care of everything. On the 3rd day, an older doctor gathered us in his office. He spoke cautiously, as with a person standing on the edge of ice. Extremely serious condition, severe head injury, infection. We're maintaining vital signs, but the probability of returning to consciousness is minimal. We can keep him on machines for a long time, but there will be no quality of life. Do everything possible, I said, and heard my voice as if from afar. Mom, gently, as in an advertisement about care, Scott intervened. Dad wouldn't want to be a burden. He is not a burden to you, I burst out. He is your father. We're thinking of you too, Benjamin chimed in. Bills, expenses, all this can consume your savings. Again money, again figures over the person. I left the office and went to the ICU as if to a church. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, entered, took his hand. If you hear me, give me a sign, I whispered. A barely perceptible squeeze. Another. A small wave under the fingers. I called the nurse. She just shook her head. That happens. But I swore to myself, he's here, he's fighting. On Friday night, the alarms suddenly howled, like dogs throughout the town. Lights came on, people ran, someone's quick footsteps, orders, strange voices mixed together. I lunged forward, but they gently pushed me aside, sat me in a chair by the wall. Time fragmented. Then the doctor came out, lowered his eyes. 4:37. I'm sorry. I slid to the floor and pressed my cheek against the cold tile. The world we had built for 42 years collapsed quietly, without noise, like a cabinet that someone had carefully unscrewed beforehand. My sons arrived an hour later, fresh, composed, as if for a meeting. Scott with a folder containing funeral home cards, budgets, numbers. Benjamin with forms applications, headers already filled out. We've already arranged everything, Scott said quickly. The simplest casket, short service. Dad wasn't one for noise. And we've also started the process for the insurance, so that he faltered, seeing my face, so that everything is without unnecessary bureaucracy. At that moment, I didn't know how to argue. I was all salt, could only cry and dry up. But even through the tears, I noticed the strange quickness. Who called them in that first hour? Why did they appear at the emergency entrance before they called me to my husband? Why did they behave so confidently with the doctors? The funeral was set for Monday. Scott, without consulting, chose the simplest option. They didn't invite the neighbors from the workshop. Why bother people? Everything went according to their convenience, as if someone were checking boxes on a task list. In the evening, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the cup where the tea was cooling, and tried to tie everything into a coherent thread. Explosion in the workshop, intensive care, conversations about money, their haste, their confidence. Something important was missing. Some screw was loose. I still didn't know that ahead of me awaited an answer that would make my blood run cold, and that in a few days I would start asking questions aloud, questions after which the smiles on my sons' faces would turn to glass. What secrets were my children hiding? What was I about to discover about them? The path to the truth was just beginning, and each step brought me closer to an abyss I never could have imagined. The day after the funeral, I took out of the old dresser a tin box with documents, the one where Walter kept everything important. The house, the workshop, the insurance. I put it on the table, sat down, breathed, and began to read the fine print, like someone else's life. The first thing I found was the life insurance policy. I remembered the sum of the old just in case. But here was a careful annotation, a stamp from half a year ago. Insured amount increased to $500,000. Half a year ago Walter hadn't discussed this with me. Who pushed him into this? Why just now? Below, another document, very recent, from 2 months ago at most. Workplace accident insurance, maximum up to $750,000. Walter had worked in the workshop all his life, but he never liked new papers. Paper will hold anything. And here, suddenly, 2 large insurance policies and almost back to back. Coincidence? After the last few days, I no longer believed in coincidences. The phone vibrated on the table, as if it had heard my thoughts. Check the account. See who withdrew money. The same unknown number. I no longer doubted. These weren't malicious jokes. Someone knew too much about us. In the morning, I went to our bank. A small room, familiar faces. The manager, Nancy Wilson, came out of her office, took my arm, sat me down. Dorothy? My condolences. How can I help? The statement, please. For the last 6 months of our joint account with Walter. All movements. She printed and placed the sheets in front of me. I ran my finger along the lines, and the cold that had lived in my chest since the day of the funeral spread. In the last 3 months, someone had withdrawn large sums, $10,000 in January, $30,000 in February, $40,000 in March. I had not made those withdrawals. Who received this money? I asked. My voice sounded strange. Your husband withdrew it, Nancy replied calmly. He came personally, said he needed funds for repairs in the workshop. I looked up. Can I see the signatures? She brought out the receipts. The signature was like Walter's, but trembling. Alien. Walter wrote uniformly, confidently. That's how he left me notes on the refrigerator. Milk and a smiley face, like a child. But here it was as if the hand wasn't his. Did he come alone? I asked. Nancy Wilson thought, squinting her eyes. 2 times for sure he wasn't alone. With your older son, with Scott. He explained that he was helping his father with the papers. Said that without glasses it was difficult for him. I squeezed my purse on my knees. So much that the clasp cut my palm. Walter never took off his glasses during the day. Without glasses, it's difficult for him. It sounded like a phrase prepared in advance. The phone flashed again. I covered the screen with my palm. Read, and it was as if I heard a contained and firm voice. The insurance was imposed by them. They convinced him for your peace of mind. It was a trap. I was sitting in the bank and for the first time felt not only pain, in my chest arose something hot, stubborn, like the flame in the stove when you add a log. They were trying to lead me like a blind person by the hand, to where everything was quick, convenient, without unnecessary bureaucracy. Thank you, I said to Nancy Wilson, carefully folding the papers. This is enough for me. Outside, it smelled of dampness and melting snow. I walked slowly to put everything in order. Recent insurance policies, withdrawals, signatures, visits with his son. Whose plan was this? And where was that thread to pull to unravel the whole ball? The phone beeped again, briefly, like a click. Go to Walter's workshop. Open the top drawer of his desk. There is what you haven't seen. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. People were walking around me. Cars were hissing in the puddles. But inside me, everything had already taken a step in another direction, toward where the answers are not pleasant, but they save. The workshop door creaked as always, but inside it wasn't as always. Too clean, didn't smell of burning. Not a drop of soot on the wall, not a charred spot on the floor. The workbench like on display, tools arranged in their places, machines in an orderly row, wiring intact. I stood in the middle and caught myself with absurd thoughts. If something exploded here, where is the mark? Where is even one piece of melted plastic? Where is the twisted iron? And where is that machine that supposedly exploded? I said it aloud, as if someone could answer. I approached the desk. The top drawer didn't yield immediately. It stuck, as always. Walter always postponed greasing it. Inside were pencils, a tape measure, an old calculator, a folder with papers, an envelope with my name. First the papers. 2 sheets torn from a graph paper notebook. Walter's handwriting. Uniform, firm, recognizable. Scott insists that I need a new insurance for Dorothy. For her peace of mind. I feel uncomfortable. I don't believe his words. Below, another day, 3 days before the hospital. Benjamin brought some papers to modernize the workshop. He's rushing me, says we need to sign it right now. I don't understand what's there. Why such hurry? I sat on the chair, which creaked like an old man. My fingers went to the envelope. It was sealed carefully in a homely way, with saliva as we used to send letters. On the front it only said Dorothy and a period. If you are reading this, it means what I feared has happened. Lately something is not right with our boys. Too interested in money. Insurance. The house. Vanessa incites them. Yesterday Scott said, Dad, we need to think about safety. At your age, any accident can be fatal. For some reason, it sounded like a threat. I love you. If anything happens, don't trust anyone blindly. Not even them. Check everything. Mark Jenkins has agreed to help. I'll go see him once more. My arms went numb, but I only realized it when the paper started to tremble. Walter saw everything, felt everything, and I closed my eyes to avoid being burned by the truth. I sat in silence, then carefully folded the sheets and put them in my purse. In the workshop, the air became dense. In the evening, Scott came with a bottle of wine and a smile that another time would have seemed caring. He didn't ask if he could enter, went straight to the kitchen, poured himself a glass, sat at the table where he once practiced penmanship. "Mom," he began softly, "I've thought everything through. The insurance payment is already in process. It will be $500,000. This will be enough for you to settle decently, buy a smaller, cozy home. Or perhaps a good retirement home. You know, where there are doctors and care." "How do you know the exact amount?" I asked as if in passing. "I helped Dad with the documents." He didn't blink. "He wanted you to have everything secure. Benjamin and I could take care of your money, to make it work. Now there are so many instruments, investments, interests, we would multiply it all." Multiply. A word as light as a soap bubble. I nodded so as not to spill what was already boiling inside. "And what do you think would be best to spend it on?" I asked, watching his eyes. His eyes lit up barely perceptibly, like a candle under the ceiling. "I would sell this house while the market is at its peak. You move to a clean, warm apartment, we make a power of attorney, and you don't have to worry about anything. Benjamin and I will take care of everything. Accounts, insurance, repairs. Give me time," I said. "I'll think about it. But don't take too long, Mom." His voice became denser. "Now it's important not to miss the moment." When the door closed behind him, I sat in the darkness for a long time. The wine on the table untouched. The clock ticked loudly, like on the night when I gave birth to the boys and counted contractions. The phone vibrated, as if listening to the silence. "Tomorrow to the police station. Ask them to register your complaint and show you the materials about the accident. In the hospital there are other causes. There are contradictions. Don't believe the explosion version." I read twice, then again, and understood that my morning was planned. And if I really wanted to go all the way, there would be no turning back. In the morning, I went to the police station. Familiar building, gray with peeling paint on the railings. The guard nodded, asked for my ID. After 10 minutes, I was invited to Detective Johnson's office. Sturdy, dry, gaze direct as a blade. "How can I help you, Dorothy Miller?" "I want to file a complaint," I said, clasping my hands on my knees. "My husband died after an explosion in the workshop, but many things don't add up. I request to see the investigation materials." He called the duty officer who brought a folder. The detective leafed through it in silence, then raised his eyes. "We don't have any report about an explosion or accident on your property. No one was dispatched. But at the hospital they said, explosion. My son's too." Johnson sighed, opened another sheet. "According to the medical report, your husband was admitted unconscious with signs of poisoning. In the biochemistry there are traces of methanol. You should have been informed of this." He paused and added carefully, "In the medical record, there's a note. At the request of close relatives, do not communicate the details to avoid traumatizing the wife. Signatories, the elder and younger son." The words hit my temples. Not explosion. Poisoning. And the relatives asked that I not be told. "We can initiate a preliminary investigation," continued the detective, "but we'll need a formal complaint. And we'll need all the documents, policies, statements, your notes, and prepare yourself for difficult procedures. Possibly we'll have to raise the question of exhumation." "Do it," I said. My voice didn't tremble. "I'll bring everything." At home they were already waiting for me. Scott and Benjamin had come with Vanessa. A package from the bakery, coffee of that brand as they emphasized. Concerned faces. Sweet smiles. "Mom, we're worried," Scott began, inspecting the kitchen like an inspector. "The neighbors say you're going to offices, asking strange questions, not eating." "Benjamin brought your favorite eclairs," Benjamin chimed in. "With coffee you'll warm up. Your hands are shaking." I remembered the message, "Don't take anything they bring," and how suddenly Walter had had an explosion. "I already had breakfast," I said and pushed aside the package. "Thank you." Vanessa smiled as if she hadn't heard. "You need to take care of your nerves. By the way, We consulted with a doctor we know. He says that, after a loss, there's often, well, distrust, suspicion, especially in women of your age, that can be treated. We're ready to help you organize care and supervision, Scott gently added. There's an option, a good retirement home. Without forcing you, of course. Just think of your health. And it would be good to sell the house, said Benjamin, as if in passing. The market is favorable now. Anyway, repairs will eat up the money. I looked at them and in each phrase heard not care, but haste. Their plans rustled like papers in a lawyer's folder. I'll think about it, I replied and looked at the clock. And now I have to go run some errands. They looked at each other. I saw how Scott slightly pressed his lips, as always when he didn't get a yes immediately. Don't take too long, Mom, he said. These matters need to be resolved quickly. They left, leaving the coffee and package on the table. Carefully, without touching, I put it all in a bag and took it out to the porch for the trash. The phone vibrated. Dorothy, this is Mark Jenkins. Walter contacted me 3 weeks ago, asked me to watch his sons. I have recordings and photos. At 3 sharp at the corner cafe. Back table. Come alone. My heart beat faster. So, it was he who was writing to me. Not someone's joke. Not a neighbor whispering. A person whom Walter himself had asked for help. At 3 I entered the corner cafe. The low ceiling smelled of fresh pastries and chamomile. A display case with pies. I sat in the farthest corner, ordered tea. My palms were still sweating. A man of about 50, with graying hair, approached unhurriedly. Formal coat, attentive eyes. He put a brown folder on the table. Dorothy Miller. I'm Mark Jenkins. My condolences. Walter was an honorable man. I nodded. I had no strength to say thank you. First, I'll warn you, he said quietly. What you're going to hear is difficult, but better a bitter truth than a flat lie. He took out a small recorder, pressed a button. Walter's voice was heard. Warm, confident, familiar. Mark, if something happens to me, it's not an accident, Scott insists. Insurance for Dorothy, so she'll be more at ease. In the papers I found clauses by which they benefit. Benjamin asks what I eat. When I go out, when I'm alone at home, says he's concerned. I don't like their words. I was sitting, clutching the cup with my fingers to avoid spilling the tea. Tears were running by themselves, but I didn't wipe them. I listened. This is from a month before the hospital, Mark clarified. And this closer to the event. Click, and I recognized Scott's voice. Clear, professional, dry. We can't wait. The old man is starting to suspect. The methanol works cleanly for me. Looks like a heart attack or stroke. We'll take Mom afterward. She'll be in shock. We'll get guardianship, and that's it. Inside me, something squeezed so tight that it was hard to breathe. Mark didn't turn it off. New recording. Benjamin, nervous laugh. Tomorrow Scott will put vitamins in his coffee. First fog in the head, then vision, then coma. Life policy $500,000 for accident, up to $750,000. We'll close everything. Mother too. Later. Again money. Again figures over the person. Mark stopped the recorder, remained silent. There are photographs, he said, and laid out the images. Your older son buying methanol at a hardware store on the highway outside of town. Pays in cash. Gives a false name. Date from 5 days before the hospitalization. In the photo, Scott at the door of the store in a jacket, with a small container in a bag. Clear, unambiguous. I felt cold in the warm cafe. And also, look, Mark showed printouts. Financial movements for the last half year. Debts. The older one owes around $700,000 to a loan shark in the city, the younger $400,000 in gambling. Plus a transfer of $50,000 to the doctor who issued the death certificate. Cash money. But there's a trail. I prove it. Why didn't you go straight to the police? I whispered. Why wait? We needed medical evidence, he replied calmly. Death, according to the papers, cardiac arrest, following trauma. With the recorder alone, it's not enough. Now, with traces of methanol in the medical record, this changes things. And furthermore, he raised his eyes. They're going tomorrow at 10 hours to Judge Patterson to initiate your incompetency procedure. I intercepted the conversation. We have little time. I put my hand on the table to stop the trembling. Then today to the police, I said. To Detective Johnson. Let them seize the recordings, order the examination. Everything official. I'll go with you, Mark nodded. But first, one last recording. You must hear it. He turned on the recorder again. This time both voices, uniform. Every day, as if discussing a repair. After father we need to get rid of mom too, Scott stated. The sound in my head became a thin buzz. I sat motionless, waiting for the next phrase. The recording cut off mid-word. Afterward, there was only noise. This is enough for me. It's sufficient, I said. Let's go to the station. We arrived at Detective Johnson's office late in the afternoon. I put Mark's folder on the table. The recorder with dates, printouts of calls, photographs at the hardware store, bank statements, copies of policies, my note from the workshop, and Walter's letter. The detective listened in silence, sometimes asking short, clear questions, noting something in his notebook. Difficult story, he finally said. But this is no longer a family dispute, it's a criminal case. Now we'll register the complaint. We'll document the recorder and photos. We'll seize them procedurally. Then the prosecutor. Urgent forensic examination. On the medical part, we'll request exhumation. Are you prepared? Prepared, I replied. Do everything as it should be done. He called the prosecutor's office. The duty prosecutor arrived, to my surprise, quickly, gray raincoat, tired eyes, but energetic voice. Another hour went into protocols. They asked me to detail who said what and when. Mark explained exactly how he obtained the recordings. I signed, marked crosses in the margins, where they indicated. By midnight, they had requests for search, seizure of phones, exhumation, detention. We'll arrest them at dawn, said the detective, so they don't have time to call anyone or destroy anything. And you try not to stay alone and don't accept any urgent meetings. At home I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the light off, listening to how far beyond the town, occasional cars whispered along the highway. At 6:00 in the morning, Scott called. Mom, come urgently to Benjamin's house. Voice tense, but trying to be even. Something terrible has happened. We'll explain there. I'm already on my way. I'm on my way, I said, and hung up, except that I was on my way to the kettle, to pour myself another cup, to occupy my hands with something. An hour later, police cars passed down the street. I saw the lights from the window. The phone vibrated again, then again. Scott, Benjamin, one after another. Insistently. I didn't answer. At 9:00, there was a knock at the door. On the threshold stood Detective Johnson. We've detained both of them, he said, without going into details. The older one denied it at first, then, when we played the recording, he collapsed. The younger tried to escape through the backyard. We had to chase him for 3 blocks. We'll interrogate Vanessa as a witness. I nodded, and for the first time in a long time, breathed deeply. Not joy, relief, as if a tight band around my chest had momentarily loosened. During the day Vanessa came, without heels, with swollen eyes, but still in an expensive coat, from the threshold, to tears. Dorothy, please withdraw the complaint. Scott isn't bad. We're in debt. They were pressuring us. I asked him, yes, but I didn't think. He poisoned my husband, I said calmly, and was planning to take care of me. I have nothing to withdraw. She was still saying something, but the meaning drowned in my own buzz. I accompanied her to the gate and closed the latch. 3 days later, the court authorized the exhumation. Heavy word, alien. But I signed everything necessary and went to the cemetery. Not to watch, no, just to be near. I stood by the gate while the special services vehicles entered and firmly held Marge's hand. Then there were laboratories, deadlines, paper formulations. The result came quickly by the standards of such cases. In the samples, methanol, concentration incompatible with life. The doctor who certified heart failure received $50,000 in an envelope. That too they found. He was arrested for falsification and obstruction of investigation. The picture was complete without gaps. The case became notorious. The newspapers ran headlines that made me dizzy. In the town they whispered. Some turned away. Others, on the contrary, brought pies and said, "Hold on, stay strong." I stayed strong. In the evening I watered the flowers and washed cups. In the morning I went to the investigator, answered questions, signed again. 2 months later they set the trial. The hall was packed. Journalists, neighbors, former workshop clients, people I didn't know. Mark sat next to me, put his hand on the back of the bench so I could feel his shoulder. They brought in my sons in identical checkered shirts from the detention center, with lowered eyes. My heart stirred with a love from the past, with memory, but over the memory lay something that couldn't be undone. The prosecutor began evenly, without embellishments. This is not a family dispute. It's a plan, calculation, debt motivation, preparation, concealment, subsequent attempt to take possession of the mother's property. I request that the audio recordings be admitted, results of examinations, financial documents. They played the recordings one after another. The room became so quiet that you could hear someone swallowing. When Scott's voice sounded, "After father we need to get rid of mom too," someone from the nearby rows gasped. A woman covered her mouth with her hand and left. I sat upright and held the shawl on my knees to avoid trembling. Then the forensic expert testified, calmly, with tables without terrible words about methanol, about the symptoms, about why the explosion had nothing to do with it. They showed photos of the workshop, clean table, intact wires. My turn to speak came inadvertently. I stood up and took the oath, as I had been instructed. I told everything without embellishing: how his hands smelled of grease, how he taught the boys to hold a screwdriver, how they later became strangers, how I heard "I'm alive" by the grave, how I sat in intensive care, how recent insurance policies surfaced in the documents, how you recognize your own son's voice and can't escape it anywhere. The defense attorneys tried to ask questions about age, stress, suspicion, but the words broke against the recordings and protocols. On the third day, the process moved to closing arguments. The prosecutor said briefly, "Calculation, greed, cold-bloodedness. I request that both be found guilty and sentenced in aggregate." The lawyers talked about the pressure from creditors, bad advice, emotions. I listened and thought, if not for the numbers, the recorder, the work of doctors and investigators, I would no longer be here. The judge retired to deliberate. The clock ticked in the silence. Then they called, "All rise." The court enters. The judge returned to the courtroom. Behind him, the clerk with a folder. I gripped the edge of the bench. Beside me, Mark slightly moved his head. "Hold on." "In the case of Scott Miller and Benjamin Miller," began the judge and directed his gaze toward us. "The court has decided." I closed my eyes for a second and heard how in the hall someone couldn't resist and sobbed. The judge read evenly, without emphasis. Like a counter, find Scott Miller and Benjamin Miller guilty. Impose punishment in aggregate of crimes. Imprisonment for a long period in a maximum security correctional facility. To the elder, life imprisonment with the right to parole not earlier than 25 years. To the younger, 25 years of imprisonment. There was a murmur in the hall. I wasn't crying. The tears had ended earlier. In intensive care, with the documents at the workshop door. Now in me, there was only silence. At last, not joy, not victory, just an even silence in which one could breathe. After the session, people approached me. Some hugged. Others whispered, "Stay strong." Marge was already crying with relief. Mark held my elbow with his palm so I wouldn't stumble on the steps. Vanessa disappeared. Later they would say she went to the city, and took back her maiden name. 3 days later came the final documents from the examinations. Everything that was already clear: methanol, concentration, time, signatures, money, $50,000 to the doctor for falsification. The chain was closed. I returned to the empty house. I took off the black dress, hung it in the closet. In the evening, I made a simple black tea, went out to the porch. The air was dense with humidity, and in that density, it was suddenly easier to stand on my feet. I said aloud, as if he were nearby, "Walter, I did everything as you asked. From now on my own. Life doesn't rebuild in a day, but like water, it always seeks its course. The insurance payment, those same $500,000 for which they were in such a hurry, I transferred to a foundation that Mark and I simply called the Walter Miller Foundation. We helped those who found themselves in a similar plight. Free lawyer, psychologist, private detective if needed, so that no one would be left alone with their family's secret. The first letters came quickly. Thank you. Thanks to you, I dared. I held these envelopes carefully, as I once held the heads of sleeping boys. I didn't sell the workshop. I removed the lock, took out the workbench, dismantled the old shelves, and in their place made flower beds, planted dahlias, nasturtiums, then roses. The earth smelled like his hands had smelled of warm iron and sun. On Sundays, I went to the cemetery with a bouquet, red roses, white carnations, and told him about the week. Who we were able to support, who we helped get to the investigation, who we simply called so they wouldn't remain silent by the window. It seemed that the wind and the leaves listened and nodded. Mark came by on Wednesdays. We drank coffee on the porch, discussed the foundation's affairs, debated about formulations. I was learning to speak in official language. He laughed. Dorothy, you have such a voice. It's a pleasure to listen to. No formulations are needed. He became a close person. Not as a replacement, no. Nothing was being replaced. Simply beside me turned out to be a person who once entered my life at the right time and stayed. About my sons, letters from the detention center, and then from prison, didn't come immediately. First from Benjamin, confused with requests for forgiveness, with promises to improve, with empty circles of justifications. Then from Scott, short uniform. Mom, I understood everything, but too late. A year later came the news. Scott committed suicide. No details. The prison warden stated it dryly. I sat on the stool and looked at one point for a long time. I couldn't cry. Inside it was empty, like in the deserted workshop. Benjamin was later transferred to the prison hospital. Psychiatric observation. His letters came less frequently, confused, smelled of medications and desperation. I didn't answer, not out of spite, right to silence. Vanessa, like water on glass, trickled away and dried up. They said she changed her job and surname. I didn't look for her. In the town at first, they whispered, turned away. Somewhere sympathized, somewhere condemned. How is it possible? A mother against her children. Then they got used to it. In the regional newspaper, an article came out about the foundation. Dry. Without sensationalism. One of the neighbors came to the garden with apples and said, "Well done, Dorothy. Family is not a cover for vileness." I just nodded. Words anyway don't explain anything if the person hasn't lived it themselves. One day, a woman of about 40 knocked on the door, sat on the edge of the chair, twisted a handkerchief, then suddenly blurted out, "My brother, I think, poisoned my mother for the apartment." I'm afraid, I heard in her voice myself, that first one by the cemetery fence with the trembling phone in my hand. We formalized the complaint. Mark took charge of the verification. 3 months later, her brother received a sentence, and she brought me a small bouquet and said, "You gave me courage. I'm not a heroine. I simply once refused to be silent." 5 years have passed since that day when by the grave sounded, "I'm alive." Now I'm 71. My hair has become completely white, wrinkles like threads on the palms. You can see where they sewed, where they unstitched. I repaired the house discreetly. New roof, light yellow walls, the color that Walter liked. In the evenings I sit on the porch, listen to how from the road comes the distant sound of engines, how someone in the neighbor's yard laughs. Sometimes it seems to me that he sits next to me, not for conversations, just to sit. And that is enough. Sometimes they ask me, "Do you miss your sons?" I don't know how to answer briefly. I miss two boys who smelled of milk and sun, who every other word said mom. Those boys disappeared before their father died. The men who took their place made their choice themselves. It's not my fault, but it's my pain. With it one can live if the pain has meaning. My meaning, that another woman doesn't remain alone in the kitchen with her doubt. My morality is simple, not from a book. Blood is not an indulgence. Love is not about enduring. It's about boundaries and respect. If a person, even a relative, does evil, they cannot be covered by family and truth. It doesn't always heal, but it always puts things in place. On Sundays I go with flowers to see Walter. On the stone is engraved, "Beloved husband, father who was betrayed, man of honor." I stand, breathe, tell him about the new affairs of the foundation. The wind whispers through the leaves, as if nodding. That's how it should be, Dorothy. And I return home alone, but not empty. This is my new beginning, living honestly, quietly, and in my own way, without giving anyone the right to decide how much my life is worth. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.